Hey everyone, Tom Butwin here for Premier Guitar, and welcome to Tools for the Task, where we help you decide on the best tool for whatever job you have at hand. In this case, we're going to be talking acoustic preamps. So whenever you go to a gig, you have your acoustic guitar and you have whatever it's going to be plugged into, whether it's your own amp, small PA, or maybe a large house PA in a venue, you always need something to go between that guitar and whatever amplification system you're using. And there are a ton of different options out there for you. So where do you begin? Well, that's where this video comes in. Make sure you check out the chapter markers across the bottom to jump around and research whatever it is you think is right for you. But to help this process along, I've broken up the preamps we're going to look at today into three different categories. Utility. The players who need everything to get through a gig included in one box. Preamps for audiophiles, those of you who want studio quality sound no matter where you are. And the players who want options. When I say options, I mean options as far as how you can manipulate your tone with effects. For purposes of demonstration in this video, I've got two Martin acoustic guitars that I actually gig live with all the time. One has a Fishman undersaddle pickup in it, and the other has an LR Baggs hi-fi bridge plate system in it. So first up in the utility category of acoustic preamps, we have the Venue DI from LR Baggs. Now this has a built-in tuner, which takes up a lot of real estate here, as you would want it to do on the pedal. It's very easy to see, and the LEDs are very bright for your outdoor gigs. Trust me when I tell you, there's nothing worse than not being able to see your tuner on a really bright, sunny afternoon and you're struggling to get your guitar in tune. So huge functionality there that you have a tuner built in, of course, along with the button that operates the tuner. It's a mute switch, so again, very functional. You also have a boost function here, again, for that pick to finger style transition to make sure your volume drop is not too crazy. And you can actually adjust how much boost you want right here on the back of the pedal. As far as the rest of the controls here, they're again focused around EQ and feedback prevention. We know that acoustic guitars can get a little unruly in louder situations depending on the type of pickup that you have in it. And this will allow you to both dial out those feedback frequencies as well as make your guitar sound as good as it possibly can. So in keeping with the kind of all-in-one Swiss Army knife approach to an acoustic preamp, you've got a bunch of different input and output options. Input, 1/4 inch, obviously. Output, XLR, and 1/4 inch. You do have an effects loop. So again, I think this is going to be a unit that is for the person who wants just one thing to throw in their bag, plug their acoustic guitar into. Yes, you can expand it with an effects loop, but it really stands alone on its own as the only thing you would need, particularly as a solo acoustic performer. Next up in the utility category, we have the Platinum Pro EQ from Fishman. So this is, as the name would suggest, again, focused on EQ when it comes to shaping your sound. And that's really an important factor amongst almost all of these preamps, is the ability to shape the EQ on your acoustic guitar. No different here with the Fishman unit. They do have some really cool frequency and notch controls here, again, aimed at taming frequencies that can be a little bit troublesome on loud stages that cause an acoustic guitar to feed back. You can dial those in or out right here on the unit. A couple things that set this apart though from other similar products is that it has a built-in compressor. So it's a one knob compressor. Anybody can use a one knob compressor without really knowing even what a compressor does, just adjust to taste. But when it comes to an instrument like an acoustic guitar, or really any acoustic instrument, it's a wide dynamic range as far as the attack or the style, whether it's a pick or your fingers. And sometimes it's nice to have a compressor that can kind of tame some of those peaks and valleys that come along with playing an acoustic instrument. Again, you have a one knob compressor here, very easy to use. The other cool thing here is that you have an EQ style switch that you can toggle between bass and guitar. So you're not limited to a unit that's just designed with an acoustic guitar in mind. You can actually switch this over for your bass, whether it be acoustic or electric. Really anything with a 1/4 inch output that you can think of, you can probably shape the EQ with on this pedal. So a couple other features to mention about this one is you have a built-in tuner, again, making this kind of like the only thing you need if you show up to a gig, depending on your gig. You do have a boost function, so if you're an acoustic player, you can actually compensate for your fingerstyle versus your picking, but if you plug a bass into this, now we're getting into some different territory, you could use that for maybe a bass solo. So again, versatility and utility. Rounding out the utility on this, of course, it's got a built-in tuner, always a very important tool. And then as far as routing, it does have an effects loop if that's something you want to take advantage of. You've got an XLR out, also a 1/4 inch out for an amplifier, so you've got some routing possibilities there. It runs off of a 9-volt battery as well as the power supply. So again, utility is the name of the game with these, and it really can function as the only thing you need when it comes to plugging your instrument into something on a gig. So lastly, in the utility category, we have the orange acoustic pedal. Now this looks like a traditional stomp box. So you electric guitar players are probably thinking, hey, that looks familiar to me. And you are exactly who I would want to talk to about this pedal. This, I think, is geared best towards the player who plays primarily electric, but has to cover a couple acoustic songs on a gig. You don't want to bring a whole separate acoustic rig, so putting this on your electric board allows you to do a few things. One, it is your DI. You have an XLR out right here on the back. Two, you get all of the EQ tone shaping you could possibly want to make your guitar sound as good as possible, but also dial in and out some of those troublesome frequencies where you might be getting some feedback. And then you've got your overall volume knob right here, which is just very easily accessible because it's larger than all the other knobs. But I will say, it's not just for the electric guitar player who wants to be able to cover a couple songs during a set. I think this would also work really well for an acoustic guitar player who's just really solely that. You could build an entire thing around this, or just use this if you wanted to, because it's got an effects loop on the side here. Again, it is your DI. So it gives you a little bit of a middle ground between just a bare bones DI that has no controls on it and just gets your signal ready to go into a mixing board. And it's not really one of those pedals that has a bunch of knobs or things you might not want or need if you're kind of a minimalist. So again, this is for the minimalist, whether you are primarily an electric player looking for something to cover a couple acoustic songs, or if you're a minimalist acoustic player who just doesn't want to delve into the world of just too many options, but you don't want to be left with just a DI. That's where this comes in. So first up in the audiophile category, we have the ALiX preamp from Grace Designs, and this is going to be a pedal that really relies heavily on studio grade and studio quality EQ to shape your acoustic tone, no matter what kind of pickup you have in your acoustic guitar. There's a variable input impedance switch on the back, so it can accommodate a variety of different systems. Also, some really cool things about this is you have a boost. Now you might be saying, what do I need a boost for if I'm an acoustic guitar player, particularly if I play solo acoustic so often, like I do? Well, I can tell you where I use a boost, and we're gonna see a boost on a couple of these preamps, is when you go from standard strumming or picking to a finger style song. If you're running your own sound, or even if you have a sound engineer, it's really nice to dial in a boost to compensate for what is usually a much lower output with your fingers versus a pick. A couple other things to note on this is it does have a tuner out, so you can mute your output here and send a signal to your favorite tuner. It's got a ground isolated XLR out, as well as an amplifier out, so you can have two different destinations for your signal with this preamp. All of that is inside of a really, really rugged metal enclosure that is absolutely ready, from what I can tell, to stand up to the rigors of gigging, despite this being more of a studio quality style preamp. So next up in the audiophile category, we have the PZ-Pro from Radial. So this does have 2 channels, but they are not the same. The second channel actually has an XLR input. So you could have one acoustic instrument that uses a traditional pickup system with a 1/4-inch cable, but you might have another, let's say a mandolin, for example, that might not have a pickup in it. You can run a microphone into this and have full EQ control over that mic, along with 48-volt phantom power. So don't be afraid to use a condenser mic, which is often the ideal choice when it comes to amplifying an acoustic instrument. So the other interesting thing about this unit is that you have a couple different options for output. You have a pre-EQ out and a post-EQ out. So why would you want to use that? Well, depending on how you're routing this and depending on the gig that you have, you may want your EQ choices to be sent to front of house, or maybe your small PA if you're running your own sound, or if you have a front of house engineer who's gonna want just the raw signal from your instrument so they can make it sound as good as possible in the room while you tweak what you want to hear on stage, that's where you can use these 2 outputs. Of course, there are 2 more foot switches here, and we do have a boost. Again, as I mentioned with the last preamp, why would you want to boost as an acoustic player? I think the obvious answer there is when you go from a pick to fingerstyle, there's often a volume drop when you go down to fingerstyle, so you can compensate for that here. This foot switch is actually assignable for 2 or 3 different functions. You can have it be the boost. You can also have it engage the effects loop. So if you're somebody who has effects pedals that you want to run with this, you can click them on and off right here, or you can have the switch function to turn both of those on or off, both the loop and your boost. And as you know, always important, a mute button. So when you put your guitar down at a set break, it is not buzzing like crazy with feedback from the monitor. First up in the options category is the Trace Acoustic Transit A preamp. So when I say options, again, I mean options tonally that go beyond just EQ shaping or boosts. This has both of those things available in it. You got your boost, you have your whole EQ section, but what this has in addition to that is chorus, delay, and reverb. Now, when you play acoustic guitar, you might be saying, well, I just want it to sound like an acoustic guitar. And oftentimes that is the right answer. But I can tell you, as a solo acoustic performer myself, it's really nice to bring some different textures into things when it's the only instrument that's happening on a gig. Of course, you can do this within the context of an ensemble or band as well, but I think it's really effective when it comes to a solo performer. So you're not going to get bogged down in controls on something like this though, because you do have a 1-knob reverb control, a 1-knob chorus control, and then a 2-knob delay control with a tap tempo function as well. Plenty of ability to manipulate the 3 effects, but again, you're not going to get bogged down in a bunch of knobs like you would with separate stomp boxes for each one of those sounds. Now, of course, we've got some routing things to talk about. You've got 2 DI outputs here, a pre and a post. So again, you can send whatever you want or don't want to front of house or maybe to your amp on stage and have control over your own sound without affecting what's happening out in the front of house. You do have the ability to have a dry output as well to skip the effects section, so you're not committed to those effects sounds, maybe for a live recording, for example. You've got 1/4-inch left and right outputs, so you can do a stereo thing if you would like. And of course, your typical 1/4-inch input. So with the addition of a tuner, you're kind of, again, in a place where you could probably get by with only this on a gig as far as your acoustic setup. So it does offer a lot of utility, but tons of options as well. Speaking of options, it has a couple other very unique things here on the back. A 1/8-inch auxiliary in, as well as a headphone out. So that gives you, you can kind of use your imagination there as to what you can do with those. But I think obviously being able to monitor and dial in some tones with headphones at home is a really cool thing to be able to do as well. Not to mention the tuner uses all of the LEDs up here for a very easy reference point on a gig, whether you're on a dark stage or a bright stage outside. And lastly, in the options category, we have the Tech 21 Acoustic Fly Rig. And what makes this really cool is right in the name there, Fly Rig. So if you're someone who needs a ton of capability for your acoustic rig in a small package, this, the size of a very large candy bar, will help you do just that and not take up very much room at all. But by no means does the name Fly Rig mean that it's not capable. You get tons of options here, and that's what this category is all about. So you've got standard things like a tuner. Of course, you need that. You've got your boost, which we've talked about on nearly every one of these preamps. A boost is important for you fingerstyle players versus flat pickers or just regular pickers. So you've got those things. But in addition to that, you've got reverb, you've got a tap tempo delay, and you've got a compressor. So typical traditional tone shaping options when it comes to your acoustic tone, but now you've got a compressor, you've got some effects, so you can spice things up, all controllable with their individual foot switches here, and just very easy to use, very nicely laid out. And again, the real strong point here is the small package. Now, you might think, hey, it's so small, there's no way that they fit an XLR output on here. That's really important as an acoustic player, but guess what? They did it. It's just thick enough to accommodate that XLR output. So a very important feature that it does have. And of course, you've got your 1/4 inch in and a 1/4 inch out. So you can run this as your only acoustic rig if it's what you use for your normal gigs, or maybe it's a fly date, as the name would imply. And the other thing you can do is you can run this just like a regular pedal in front of an amp. That's where the 1/4 inch out comes in handy. It is designed for acoustic guitars, but I think you could get away with running a bass into this if you had to. You could take advantage of that compressor. Depending on the type of bass player that you are, you could also use the reverb and delay to make things kind of interesting. Definitely worth some experimenting. It does what it's intended for really well. So that's the acoustic guitar player who wants a all-inclusive option that has a lot of options built into it, but in a small footprint. But again, it kind of goes beyond the acoustic world as well. So that's really nice for versatility and, of course, options. So again, my name's Tom Butwin here for Premier Guitar. This has been Tools for the Task, and make sure you use this video as your ultimate guide to acoustic preamps. So find out what your task is, find the right tool for the job, get out there and make some music, and we'll see you in the next one.